I'm Nandi Dlepu. I am a creative producer and strategist, and one of my areas of expertise is event production and promotion. Event production has a lot to do with coming up with the idea of the actual event and producing what the event requires. So from thinking of what the art direction of the event is going to encompass, to what the lineup is going to look like, where it's going to be, and even some consideration into the sponsorship packages that would be available as a result of the event. And you get to touch a little bit into promotions, which is the PR and marketing of that event. I think there's a lot of misconception as to what an event promoter is versus what an event producer is. An event producer oversees the full event. This person has their hands in everything, whereas promotion is isolated to just the PR and marketing of that event. So I think the traditional event promoter are people that you would have come to know and understand in the club space, where they help promote a particular night at that specific club or institution, whereas an event producer is someone who will actually come up with potentially a property and then produce that event property. Wherever there's an event, you will need an event producer. You need someone who is familiar with not just, the aesthetics or what makes a vibe, but who's also familiar with the legalities of having an event. I think a lot of times people just assume it's about bringing people together and not realizing that you have to have city approval, not understanding that food vendors, for instance, need to have a certificate of health or whatever. So I think having an event producer is the equivalent of having a music video shoot and having a producer. It's the equivalent of being on a film set and having the producer. It's the person to help that idea come to life, help you finance that idea, and help you think it through, help you find the right people to help that idea come alive. I think it is one of the few careers that's relevant across spheres. So if you think about it in corporate entities have things from as little as team building sessions to end of year functions or special events littered across their calendar, which they require the expertise of an event producer to do. Then you have really amazing brands who want to get into a more lifestyle aspect of their brand. So they want their brand to manifest themselves in the real world. They'll also just get into bed with an event producer to help them do that. So it's just one of those careers, depending on the entity and depending on the brand. If you're keen on specifically building community, that's where I would think event producer would come in handy. It's about bringing people together, nurturing a sense of community, loyalty, and brand love or affection, depending on what you're trying to achieve it for. I actually studied to become a producer, and as you know, filmmaking is all about storytelling. And the longer you're in this game or profession, you understand that everything is storytelling. It's about a clear beginning, middle, and end. And when you have consumers or people attending your event, you think of them as cast members and you consider how you want to tell the story. And that's how I've always looked at events. So I came from traditional storytelling, which was through filmmaking and advertising and a lot of short form content. And I was really intrigued by how you can do the same thing, but in the eventing space. So I didn't have a traditional come up into the space, but I think that if you're a person who is really passionate about storytelling and you're specifically passionate about bringing people together for whatever need or service, then event production could be something that's up your alley. In order to become an event producer or even promoter for that fact, I think you can take very traditional routes. You can definitely study event management. Event management is a great course. You can find it as a short course or as a degree at various institutions here in Johannesburg and worldwide, really. But I think what you really want to do is start throwing little things. Throwing something like a dinner party is an event. My friends often joke and say how I overthink everything. And I'll consider from the time they come into my house, what are they looking at? What are they smelling? I'll sometimes have scented candles or I'll burn some incense or whatever. What's playing in the background? I tend to prepare a playlist. I have a menu. I consider what we're doing at the end of it. Do we have board games ready or do I have a live concert concert ready for us to watch together and just hang out. So I like to like flex that muscle as part of my everyday like life, because I'm also a person who believes that, you know, we don't live 9 to 5s. You shouldn't necessarily switch off from what you do, particularly when you're passionate about it and love what you do. It should manifest itself like in your everyday life. If you're like a stylist, I would assume that everything you do is imbued with a sense of style. If you're an event producer or passionate about event producer, it's in your core, it's in your DNA. It's going to be in the way that you organize family picnics. It's going to be in the way that you prepare vacations and so on and so forth. I think that as event producers, it's really important that we understand how to create and manage budgets. At the end of the day is if someone comes to you and says, I have 100,000 Rand, create an experience for me. You need to think within the confines of the 100,000 Rand. You can't come back to a client, particularly when you've been approached to create an event on another person's behalf. You can't come and be like, okay, I spent 150. So it's about being creative within the confines of a budget. And think of it as confines is not the right word. You should be challenged positively by budgets. So really important understanding how to create and manage budgets. I think also what's incredibly important is managing people. I think the type of people that you choose to surround yourself with will either bring something to the event or take something away from it. You really want to make sure that it's not just a skill thing, but it is a combination of passion and interest. So you can have someone who's really great at art direction, but if you are creating a film festival and they have not a single interest in films, you know, it can really hamper the quality of that production. So I think like understanding people, being able to build up a good team is important. And then really, for me, it's always being able to align with a really great creative partner. I've often considered myself a creative producer, but I have fantastic relationships with some really prominent creative directors and art directors who are able to help me bring an event concept visually to life. And those are the things that people engage in, right? Like visual settings help set the mood. So as you like go into like a festival or a fair or an exhibition, when you're confronted by a visual spectacle, that's like one thing done. So I think knowing how to manage money, building the right type of team, finding the right creative partner have been for me incredibly crucial to pulling off a really great event. You can definitely be an event producer that is employed by a brand or by a company. I think we actually interact with some of them a lot of the times. I think brand managers on some level are event producers, you know, often conceptualizing their own like brand orientated platforms or events. So sometimes you can work internally within a corporation or a brand and deliver that service, and sometimes you can outsource that service. I've often found that the best types of events or the best type of magic happens when an internal event producer partners with an external one. Because I think sometimes internal event producers can be so bogged down, you know, with their understanding of the institution, whereas when you bring outside eyes, they're able to like look at things from a different angle, but be guided by the internal stakeholder, making sure that we don't go outside the bounds of what the brand would like to communicate or not communicate. Like in any other career, I think you need to build a strong foundation, which is a combination of experience and also quality productions behind your name. Once you have that reputation, you know, you begin to attract really great opportunities. I've been event producing for almost 15 years, and I'd have to say that the last 5 years, it's been easier for me to attract those opportunities because I have, you know, reputation behind me. There is history, and there's, you know, clients who recommend me and my work to other people. So that's been great. But like any other career profession, you have to pay your dues. You have to have a solid body of work that speaks for you and on your behalf when you're not in a particular room. I think making a living as an event producer is challenging. I think it's challenging because I think a lot of people come into event production, particularly in terms of creating their own platforms, not necessarily with the right set of skills or from the right place or intention. So you find people creating events, for the cool factor of being the party person or the person that puts things together. Or you find people who are incredibly well-intentioned, who want to build community, who want to, move the culture forward, but unfortunately they don't have the right set of skills. And producing, being able to manage this as a business is the do or die skill as far as I'm concerned. You can have an amazing, beautiful event, but if it's operating at a loss, that was not a business, you threw us a party. So I think that it's very challenging for a combination of those two things. I think that the space can be overly saturated by people who are doing it for the wrong reasons. Equally, I think there are people who are well-intentioned, just lacking in terms of like the managerial skills. I think one of the things that I was able to do, because consider even my history, I've only been doing this full-time for 3 years. Prior to that, I was a producer in the commercials and film industry. So I learned how to run a budget, how to build a budget. I'm very apt or skilled when it comes to presentations and sponsorship acquisition as a result of my background. And I think those two things have been a crucial ingredient of part of my sauce that really helps set me apart and keep me sustainable. I would definitely encourage a loved one to be an event producer. I would get into specifics about how they could be a credible events producer, just making sure that they study. And I think studying isn't necessarily formal education, but are reading the books that they need to read, are proactively, building SWOT and competitor analysis based on what exists locally and internationally, and learning from the people that have come before them. In my honest opinion, the most powerful and profitable position to be within the event production space is the person who owns the brand. At the end of the day, if you have built a really great brand, a really sustainable brand, never mind the types of sponsorship opportunities that you're attracting, but the kinds of spin-offs that you can license out. Like, you can go from a festival, which is like an in real life 1 day or 2 day experience, and if you've established yourself as like a relevant part of that culture, you can spin off into a content series. You can then spin off into digital publication. It's not unfathomable that, Feel Good Series could one day have, awards for emerging and upcoming alternative musicians. But I think the power lies in owning the brand. And who's to say, maybe after 10, 15 years, you could sell that brand. We've seen a number of brands that we love, change hands in the 10 to 20 years that they've existed, and people are none the wiser when Rocking the Daisies shifted hands. But there's money to be made, I think, in owning the property, which I think goes back to the intellectual rights of the thing. I think that to be a supplier is great because you don't have any of the responsibility. You sleep much easier than the person who owns the brand, but definitely the power, and the huge commercial value is within owning a really good brand. The best way to establish yourself is by being consistent and some level of being a brand of your word. So if you say that you are this type of personality as a brand and this is your intention, is to consistently do things that affirm your communication with us, being commercially sustainable. And I think commercially sustainable is being a source of income for the people within your community, legitimately so. I think that, asking, DJs to play for free, asking live performers to perform for free is highly unsustainable. And I think that you can build a really great reputation by being the person that predominantly, is cutting that check. I think that's really, really important. I would definitely say the biggest misconception is that what we do is easy. Think of a single event as being like a business. you have all the headache that comes with like owning a business. So like the supplier payments, the contracts, the brand, like the look and feel, how it communicates, and like managing sponsorships. It's a lot, and I think that sometimes people come into an 8, maybe 12-hour experience and take for granted that it was 3 months in pre-production. But you go into a festival like Daisies and you can truly take for granted that it's probably like 10 months of pre-production. And I think they genuinely forget that there's so much work that goes into it and work that goes in afterwards. Because then we have to deal with post-production. And post-production, never mind the recon and the paying of suppliers, could also be the packaging of content. Post-production often leads into pre-production into the next event. So you're packaging all the content that you've created from event A and in lieu of event B. So like post kind of like overlaps into pre-production, and it's just like, it's work. But if you're passionate about it and it bears fruit, it's definitely worthwhile labor. But definite misconception is that what we do is easy. What's been very challenging for me is feeling like the spaces get oversaturated. And it's not to say that there shouldn't be a lot of things going on, because they definitely should, but I think that we should be trying to create an ecosystem that like complements one another rather than imitating one another. I think that you can truly appreciate a property like Pantone Sundays, but you don't have to go create your own version of my color-themed fashion party. I think that you can be like, oh, I'm inspired by this, what can I create that feeds me, or whatever. So I think sometimes it's about creating things. It's like a puzzle. So you just want to have all these pieces just kind of like come together to create this really beautiful picture. I get very, very excited when I see new things coming up and new and different things, or slightly evolved things coming up and into the space. But I definitely think that, you know, being in a space where people imitate rather than innovate is a pet peeve. I definitely think that you should have some level of business acumen in order to make sure that you are managing not just expectations, but money and relationships in the most professional manner possible. I think you need to be quite honest about the kind of personality that is required to pull this job off. It requires grit. You can't be a person who's easily accepts no's. You need to think of no as a no as, okay, this no is going to bring me closer to a yes. And I think it also is a career that is in service. And I think that also requires a kind of personality, a personality that should care about community, about developing community and so on, in my opinion, because I think then you'll make better choices in building teams, better choices in suppliers, just better choices and more responsible choices overall when it comes to the event, which actually help and bolster the brand of that event. So those would be my 3 tips if you would like to become an event producer.